Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Roger's dad, who is a member of the Alderney Air Transport Group. We're going to discuss the AATG proposals to provide an alternative air service for Alderney. Good to see you, Roger. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
First of all, tell us about the group. It's a think tank, I suppose, really, isn't it?
Well, it's a little bit more than that. It's three of us who are ordinary residents, each with our own background in professional aviation. Rod Paris, for example, was running an AOC operation and it was involved primarily with medical evacuation. He had about 11 aircraft in the UK going over Europe, all over Europe. Malcolm is an aviation consultant and he will go to an airline at their request and work out route studies for them and all the sort of numbers and calculations that apply to what we're doing. And for myself, I was the managing director of Guernsey Airlines before it was sold, routes to Manchester and Gatwick. And I'm also the founder of Channel Island Air Search. So I had 28 years on the crew of Air Search and very familiar with aeroplanes of this size, the Islander particularly. So we've got different backgrounds, but they're all very useful for what we're trying to do.
Compatibility being the key word. Now, what was the reason that triggered you to produce this report?
Well, we felt instinctively that the proposition that you extend the runway, and I see the planning application is still on the door at the airport today, and then you operate ATR aircraft half full, was unlikely to come to fruition. Now, we asked the politicians what was Plan B in the event that that didn't come to pass, and we were told there's no Plan B. And we thought, well, there are two things here. There ought to be a Plan B, and there ought to be people in Alderney coming forward on behalf of the community so that instead of going to Guernsey with a begging bowl, we could go to Guernsey and say, look, here's a solution to the problem in the event that the Dornier is withdrawn and the runway is not extended.
And neither of you, neither of the trio, have got any financial interest in this. You're doing it out of the goodness of Alderney.
Oh, yes, we have no interest in any airline or any aircraft operator or any sales organization
Yeah.
selling airplanes. Basically, we will not be involved in the operation itself. Our interest will end, if it doesn't end before, on the day that the first passenger steps on the first aircraft.
And hopefully that'll be you.
It could be.
Okay, tell us about your plans, particularly about the aircraft.
Well,
And first of all, before I say this, what are the runway requirements here, as we've got
exactly.
at the moment?
As they are at the moment, safe to
Yeah,
say that in any refurbishment of the runway, there is a plan to expand the width to
yeah.
23 meters down the whole of the runway. So the existing runway with a 23-meter width at the runway strength as at present, once it's been refurbished, is a good long-term solution for us.
Okay. And the plane, I believe, is a Tecnam P 2012. I've done a bit of research and taken a ride on one through the internet. Tell us about the plane, please, Roger.
Well, yes, we are very firmly of the view that for uh, sectors which require the aircraft to be in the air for 12 minutes and not much above 2,000 feet, you can only really do it sensibly and economically with piston-engined aircraft. If you're going to do that, and I'll come on to turbine aircraft later on, if you're going to do that, you're limited to the sort of aeroplane that we've chosen. There were two in the running. One was the Britten-Norman Islander, which a lot of people are familiar with because Orkney used to operate them in the early days, and Air Search uses it now. And indeed, they're used in Scotland on the Highland and Island services. And then there was the Tecnam, which is a more recent design. It's got an advantage in that it takes a slightly higher payload. its accessibility for passengers is a bit better, but basically they're both 9-seat piston-engined aircraft.
Looking at the Tecnam though, it's a difference and a half away from an Islander, isn't it? In terms of the fact it's got an aisle to go in, to get to your seats. You don't sort of have to tear the side off the aircraft as you do with an Islander. It looks a fabulous piece of kit. So,
Yeah.
who would actually own it?
Well, there will be options for this, but our suggestion is that government own the aircraft because we've put this together based on the Scottish model. And if government retains the ownership of the aircraft, then if a particular operator hits choppy waters,
Yeah.
you've still got the asset, and that's our approach to it. So we would recommend that the ownership of the aircraft and the conducting of the operation are in separate hands.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's not unusual, is it? So from that point of view, you're really coming up with the equivalent of a bus service, aren't you?
Yes, exactly that. If you look at our timetable, you'll see that there is something of the order of a minimum of 7 one-day 7 round trips a day in the winter, 11 in the shoulder months, and during the Alderney week, we hit about 16 rotations. So it's fairly high frequency.
And so from that point of view, you're talking Alderney, Guernsey, but you have got options for other airports, yes?
Yes, a limited service from Alderney to Jersey and a limited service from Alderney to Cherbourg. A subsidy will be required for the Alderney Guernsey service, but the other routes would not attract a subsidy. And the idea is that they are new markets in the sense that they haven't been flown regularly for several years. And it's just a toe in the water to see what the market demand is there.
Cherbourg is potentially good in terms of the fact you can pick up the TGV there to take you into Paris. And of course, as far as Jersey is concerned, you can get onto EasyJet flights, which are considerably cheaper. So, there's obviously some logic there. Um, you're not including Southampton. What's the reason for that?
Well, it's a fairly complex set of circumstances. The first is that you already know, as a result of what has been said recently by the States of Guernsey or Policy and Finance, that airfares to Southampton, albeit that they're subsidised, are going up to something like £480 return, with effect from January on the Dornier. Now, our calculations with an unsubsidised operation show that route coming in at something just under £600 a return fare. That clearly won't work. And the reason for that is that the charges at Southampton are extremely high. And there are two other considerations. The first is that a little aeroplane of the sort we're proposing is much slower on the approach than the fast jets, and so we'd be something of a nuisance in any event. And if you take an aeroplane out of service to wander up to Southampton and back, it prevents you from doing something like 3 return Alderney Guernsey sectors. So it's not the most economical use of the aeroplane. That said, there's a lot that we can do to mitigate the issue of flying through Guernsey, which a lot of people have to do at the moment anyway.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And, an option such as Leon Solent isn't on for the reason that you just described. You're putting the plane out of local action for God knows how many hours, sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, there's that. And of course, people have looked, going from east to west, people have looked at Shoreham,
Yeah.
Leon, Solent, and Bournemouth. But the issue with each of those airports is that there is no direct access to onward travel. At Southampton, you've got 90 steps from the terminal to
Yeah.
the platform, and at Gatwick, as you know, you get straight into the rail system. So they have been tried repeatedly, but they've never actually worked very well. So we're saying we're trying to keep things as simple and as cheap as possible. We can't be all things to all people, and this is something which we can't do. Our airfare on Southampton has become much more believable now that you see what P&R are saying about that route from January onwards.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, I think a thing that worries a lot of people here at the moment is the absence of a 24-hour medevac. And I believe your scheme would allow for that.
Yes, we thought it was very important to revert to the situation we had when Orkney was in private ownership with the islanders and trilanders, and that is to say that an aeroplane is available 24 hours a day with a pilot in Alderney, so it's at the point where it is required for that golden hour where you need to move somebody very quickly. We can do that with our 3 aircraft fleet, and it would only be in exceptional circumstances that there wasn't an aeroplane sat there during the day. Nighttime there always will be.
Yeah.
So we can, and the point about that is because it's a more simple operation, I think we can save health and social security a considerable amount of money, which they can spend on other things.
How long does it take to put a stretcher in? Because the Dorniers were an absolute nightmare initially, weren't they?
Well, we've done it ourselves, and the answer is 8 minutes.
Okay, I'll take that point no further, Roger.
Well, the only thing I would say is that the Tecnam can accept 2 stretchers.
Yeah.
So let's stretch it and say 16 minutes.
Okay, that's interesting. That's very good indeed. Okay, so do you think Aurigny would take up the cudgel and run the service for you?
Well, we have been in discussion with their CEO, and we've had a very good hearing from him. Um, I'm not sure. They may wish to continue with the service, and speaking personally, my fear would be that they would let the Dorniers go and then go out and buy a pair of twin otters
Hmm.
and say, well, we're going to carry on as before.
Hmm.
And people will form their own judgment as to how suitable that is. And of course, it will be a more expensive operation. There are 2 scenarios for Orkney. They can do as you've suggested and say, right, well, we're going to do the whole lot. Or they can say, we're going to focus on our ATR operation and do the things that we really regard as our main plank of business. And what we want is to work with somebody who will feed us the traffic. Because whatever does happen, either Orkney are involved, or if they're not, there's got to be a very high level of cooperation with them to mitigate some of the problems which people incur at the moment when they get to Guernsey and have to wait 4 hours for an onward flight, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you'd need a situation where you guarantee an element of smoothness from that point of view, but also it would be good if people could buy through tickets, wouldn't it?
Yes, that would be our objective. You can deal with this in 2 ways, and I'll come on to that later on if you wish, or
Hmm.
I'll deal with that now.
Okay, now.
Okay. Well, the first option is that you put a baggage scanner and the other equipment you need into Alderney so that it no longer becomes a dirty airport.
Yeah.
Now, this is a bit of a movable feast because although Alderney is a dirty airport, both Guernsey and Southampton accept traffic from it at the moment. However, Jersey would not. So you can clean up the airport and check people in on a through ticket. And then when you get to Guernsey, you remain airside in
Transit
a
lounge.
transit lounge, well,
Yeah.
a transit facility going
Yeah.
straight into the departure lounge.
Yeah.
Obviously, that needs the cooperation of the airport authority, but it's done in very many other places, and so it would be rather unusual if that wasn't possible. The second option is that you do away with security at Alderney altogether, because there is no requirement on the part of the CAA and the other authorities for security on an aircraft with less than 20 seats. So people will come to the airport. They would probably walk onto the apron with their baggage, which would then be loaded onto the aircraft. And at the other end, it will be handed to them, and they would go through a discreet channel which keeps them well away from the normal airside of Guernsey Airport, go straight round to the front of the terminal, whether in a minibus or on foot, whatever the arrangement is, and check in just as if they got off the bus from St. Peter Port. So those are the two options. And in both cases, through ticketing would be an ideal arrangement.
I know that some people have suggested that the Dornier be replaced by a twin otters, which are obviously better from the point of view of the fact they can land on grass, but they're still turbine aircraft, aren't they? So they're expensive to run for short hops.
Well, yes. First of all, they can land on grass. They can land on snow, and they can land on unmade strips, laterite strips, and things.
Yeah.
That's what they're built for. But in fact, the Civil Aviation Authority, if the aircraft is on the British register, will not permit them to use the grass at Alderney Airport. So they are confined to the long runway, and they do have a rather limiting crosswind because of the way the undercarriage is structured. And so they probably would be no better than the Dornier is at present. You're talking about a 25-knot crosswind at the most, and we would expect a 30-knot crosswind for the Tecnam.
Hmm.
The issue of these gas turbine engines is simply this. You're operating at low level, and they're very, very thirsty at low level because these engines are designed to go up and stay in the air for longer periods of time. And the engine is governed by cycles, not by flying hours, which is what happens with piston-engined aircraft. And so, put simply, you start an aircraft up, and in a minute it's gone from 0 to 700 degrees centigrade. You then fly it for 12 minutes, shut it down, and it starts to cool down. 20 minutes later, you wind it up again, and so it goes on. Now, these engines really don't like that, and when they come to be overhauled, they are very expensive in comparison with a piston-engined aircraft. So, really, whether you're talking Dornier or Twin Otter, let's say you're talking a rather fine horse, and no pun intended for the people of Guernsey, what we need is a donkey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What about the availability of avgas in the long run? You're pretty confident that's always going to be around as long as jet fuel's around?
Yes, it is, or an alternative to avgas is a possibility. But for some long time, Alderney has been missing a trick, because if you have avgas available at Alderney Airport for other aircraft,
Hmm.
you will attract a considerable amount of French traffic and English traffic, because the difference in price between French fuel and the fuel you can uplift in Alderney, and to a lesser extent in England, is quite considerable. So you attract people to come, and then hopefully they stay, and there's a daily spend. Now, uh, as far as Guernsey is concerned, of course, they would rather traffic went to Guernsey and use the facilities there. But I'm afraid Jersey have stolen a march on us, because in Jersey, the landing fees, I believe, are slightly cheaper. But the point about it is, when you land, you get 7 days free parking.
Hmm.
And bingo, people are going there, staying in hotels, hiring cars, eating in restaurants, and doing all the other things.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting
Uh,
about the Twin Otters, because as you know, Aurigny ran them for a time during the 1980s. And the reason then that they gave up on them was the very reason that you gave me just now, that they weren't fit for purpose.
Oh, they didn't last very long, did they? It
About two or
was
three years, I think. Yeah.
yeah, they didn't work well at all. And uh, I was speaking personally when I made the comments about the Twin Otter, but I really wouldn't want to see us go and repeat the problems that existed at that time, when here is a cheaper, easier solution to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Cracking on then. This question of a single pilot, this is nothing new for us. We've had it for many, many years with the Trilanders. So that's not an issue, is it really?
Well, it isn't an issue because the aircraft is certified for single pilot operation, and Orney, pardon me, must have flown millions and millions of passenger miles
Mm.
with a single pilot without anything much by way of a problem. Let's face it, you're only 6 or 7 minutes away from either airport when
Yeah,
you're in the middle of the route, and I mean, at the end of the day, if the community of Alderney said, "Oh, good heavens, no, we've got to have two pilots," you can have two pilots. It's just the snag that you've got to pay for it.
absolutely. Do you see pilot recruitment as being a problem? You know, bearing in mind accommodation on Alden is not that easy at the present time.
Well, the simple answer to that is no. We've done quite a bit of homework on this because we're very well aware that one of the problems which besets Orkney is that they have difficulty in recruiting and retaining pilots, especially first officers.
Mm.
And one of the problems there, of course, is that younger pilots are coming through, putting in a year's worth of experience, building up their hours, and then going off to fly larger jets. And the other thing is that, of course, the cost of housing in Guernsey, whether it's rented or bought, is very much more expensive than Alderney.
Yeah.
There will be two sorts of pilots who will be interested in our operation. There are the people towards the beginning of their career who want to come in and very quickly build up some sectors and build up some hours. And no, it would be wrong to think that they would necessarily stay with us for a long period of time, but certainly a year or so. Although Rod found with his pilots on his similar aircraft, they liked it so much they stayed with him.
Well, it is
Anyway,
flying. It is flying, isn't it?
it's hands-on flying.
Hands-on flying. Yeah.
And
And
the other thing about that is that we as Orkney used to in the old days, we are attractive to people who at the age of 55 have had quite enough of flying large aircraft. They can come down to Alderney, have a very nice life, and perhaps pick up half a roster, do half a week's
yeah,
work.
yeah.
They've got a good pension from the airline. They're still doing a bit of flying, and that suits them for 5 years.
Paid hobby, eh? Now, what
Yeah.
about the cost of all this, Roger? You did give me some figures, I believe, and you were reckoning that three aircraft would be about 7.2 million. Would that be new or second
Yes,
hand?
and that's a brand new aircraft.
Mm.
There is always a thought, well, why don't you lease? And when you look into this, what you find is that the cost of leasing is very little different to the cost of purchase. And the thing to remember is that aircraft of this sort retain their value. So in 5 years' time, it's not unreasonable to think that you would sell it for what you paid for it. So
As good as that.
back to a leasing company.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and about 9.3 million if you went for four aircraft. And just to put it in perspective, if you went and bought a new Cessna Sky Courier, that is basically a freight plane designed for Federal Express, but 19 seats put in it.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do that, you're talking £10 million a copy.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and of course, we do have a precedent for government owning assets like this because the Guernsey government bought two tanker ships because St Sampson's dries out and the ships have to sit on the bottom while they're unloading, and there aren't many of those about. So they They wanted to protect themselves, and they went out and bought two ships, formed a company with some local directors, and it's been running those ships successfully for years.
As they did also, Roger, with an airline. We keep that as an in joke, I think, from that point of view. I'm looking at the clock. We've got about 10 minutes to go. Alderney government, what do they say about it?
Well, I'm sure they didn't mean to be patronising when they said, oh, it's a jolly good idea, but really there's so much work to be done. Nothing can be thought about this until the runway is sorted out. Our response to that is that we have not shared the detail of our costing with politicians in Alderney for obvious
Yeah,
reasons, but we've offered the decision makers, that is to say, Deputy Trott and um, Al Brouard looking after health and so on, we've offered them an open book conversation. We were quite happy to show them all our costings. We can tell you that we need 9 pilots and what they will cost, what the insurance comes to, what the fuel costs are, what the engineering costs are. We've done it all properly. So actually, there's a box there, and you could take the ribbon off, go into the box, and you've got the makings of an operation. It's a lot more researched and resolved than local government in Alderney would suggest.
yeah. Okay. Well, I won't get too deep into this because, I have various criticisms for the aforementioned. Having said that, you have got a few new ones in, new states members, so perhaps they'll be a bit more capable of persuasion, shall we say, from that point of
Well,
view.
I think the only comment I would make on that is that we have approached them and said that we would like to brief them in the same way as we've briefed
Yeah.
certain Alderney politicians,
Mm.
and indeed we'll be doing that in very short order.
Yeah,
So
sure.
they'll have full understanding.
But the argument about getting the runway sorted first, you want to run these things in parallel, surely, don't you?
Well, you could put a Tecnam on the end of the runway today in the same way as you put a Dornier there. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
ideal.
yeah. But
Yeah.
but but what I'm saying is they're saying to you, let's get the runway sorted before we do anything else. I would have thought you needed to run both bits together, but there we are.
Well,
Well,
I don't know what their agenda is, to
no,
be honest.
no. Will 3 aircraft do you? Will that be enough?
Only just two
4 would be
aircraft.
better.
Yes, four would be better. But if we have to start on the lowest possible cost basis with the Tecnam, we can run it for a year with three, but ideally you'd want four.
What's the delivery like on these Tecnams?
Oh, pretty good. There's a lead time of something under a year on the first one.
Yeah,
If we all know what we're doing, we can go out and do something about it.
yeah, okay. And what about the fares? What are you thinking based
Well,
on, what we're paying at the moment?
it's a movable feast. We
Hmm.
set ourselves a target fare of £65.
Yeah.
That's a one-way fare, and we would like to stay as near to that as possible. Of course, we've got various things which are changing. For instance, the airport fees at Guernsey and Alderney are going to go up considerably. But it's very difficult for us because Port said we've lost 9 million in the year. But if you believe GPEG, the think tank, Lord Digby Jones is
Hmm.
chairman, 7 million of that nine is because they've added depreciation in for the first time. So you're never quite sure where you are with this, really.
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, Robert McDowell is always banging on about the fact that they don't have a proper accounting procedure in Guernsey or here. And it's only when you have those sort of things in place that you really know what the true situation is. Baggage and dogs.
Well, within the ticket price, 15 kilos of hold baggage, bit of hand baggage, not a lot,
No.
and 23 kilos for a dog. The limitation being that the loaders limit the bags to that sort of weight because of health and safety issues. So that will be as at present as respects dogs. If you need to take 30 kilos, you can buy an extra 15 kilos worth of baggage, but we're a small airplane. We're trying to encourage people to be as sensible as they can with their luggage,
Yeah.
especially if they've got to carry it out the airplane.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, do you see a situation where the ground staff wouldn't actually process it in the way they do at the moment?
Well, the handling wouldn't be quite the same because apart from anything else, the aircraft doesn't need an external power source. So
No.
a lot of the running around the aeroplane that you have at the moment is no longer required. But it wouldn't be that different, to be quite honest. And the whole operation is Alderney based, pilots, engineering, except for major engineering and ground staff.
Which is where it all started in 1968.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Sir Derek Bailey showed us what to do, and we're trying to get back towards that, some way towards that.
Okay, just a minute to sum up the situation for of the plan in terms of all the good bits.
Well, uh, a low cost, high frequency service which is utterly reliable, which has a medevac service which doesn't impinge on the schedule if you have to move somebody between Guernsey and Alderney or the other way around, and as low a level of subsidy as possible, both as respects fare paying passengers between Alderney and Guernsey and as low a cost to health and social services on the health side. That's the idea. Keep it simple, keep it reliable, keep it cheap.
Roger, thank you very much. I found it most enlightening, and I wish you and Malcolm and Rod success. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Bye.